And hello, everybody, and thanks for sharing part of your day with me. I was in architecture for about 20 years. I was a principal with Burt Hill, now part of Stantec, and I went with Primavera for a few years and got a much broader exposure to construction in our industry, and have been working in that area now at McGraw Hill for the last 12 years, and we are now in our second week of being a private company. We left McGraw Hill, and we stand alone now as Dodge Data and Analytics. But it's all the same elements that you're familiar with, ENR and architectural record, and then our Dodge data and suites. So we're looking forward to an exciting future as a private company. And we're still doing the research. You're welcome to go to our analytics store and download any of these things for free. We probably have about 40 of them up there now on different topics. A lot of them have to do with BIM, but there's information mobility and prefab and lean construction and a lot of work in the green area. And these are all free download because they're sponsored in advance by companies that care about this and want to get help us get the word out about the latest trends. So the one that we're going to talk about today is brand new. It was launched at an event actually in Singapore a couple of weeks ago. And it's the Business Value of BIM for Owners. A lot of the work that we've done studying the value of BIM heretofore has really been focused largely on architects and contractors. We've always surveyed owners, but you tend to get a low return rate when you do online surveys with owners. So what we set out to do this time specifically was just look exactly what owners are thinking about. We want to establish a baseline of how they perceive BIM and look at some of the public owner BIM policies, which are driving BIM in a lot of the construction economies around the world. We want to take a look at the difference between what happens when you have a central BIM mandate versus what we have here, which are agencies and states kind of working independently. Determine those factors that owners say are going to impede or accelerate their continued involvement in BIM. And then hopefully we want this document to really inspire a lot of owners around the world. They're very peer influenced, and so we're hoping that the numbers of owners who participated in this will be a great inspiration to an awful lot of other owners to get involved with BIM or grow their involvement so that we can get better buildings and cities and infrastructure everywhere in the world. So the way we divided this, when you see the report, it's in three basic pieces. We did a pretty deep dive into policy research, trying to figure out where do we stand with all these various governments and all these various policies. And we did some deep dive insights with interviews in Singapore and Scandinavia, and we did a survey in the UK and the US. Then we did a telephone survey because you really can't get owners to respond to online surveys. So we actually got on the phone and went through a complete interview with 101 owners in the US and 40 in the UK during July and August. We screened them in advance to make sure that they're mostly on buildings as opposed to infrastructure, that they're currently involved at least one building project with BIM and are aware of its use and are aware of its benefits. And we worked hard to get a pretty good range of public and private. In the UK, we have 50-50 mix. Here, it's a little bit more public. Annual construction budgets, we made sure we're talking to people who have meaningful construction budgets. So here you had to at least have $10 million a year in construction. We spread it around different types of buildings, renovation and plus new experience. And then we have different groups of people who have different percentages of the amount of work that they're doing in BIM. So we tried to get a representative group of the industry. And thirdly, there's a bunch of special features, as there are in most of the SmartMarket reports that we do. There's some case studies. There's some deep dive owner interviews that we did. There's BIM for FM, BIM for sustainability. We put in some guidance to owners about how to use consultants most effectively. And we also asked some AEC firms who have a lot of experience working with owners, what is it that makes a good BIM owner? And then our own observations and recommendations and some resources. So again, this is really intended for the owner audience to try and raise the level of ownership and capabilities around being a good BIM owner. And we want to thank our sponsors on this. Autodesk and Skanska were both premier sponsors for us, and Balfour Beatty and Mortensen were corporate partners, and then the Steel Construction Institute, the Building Smart Alliance, and Hensel Phelps also were supporting partners for us. So I'm going to take you through just an overview of the report, and again, you'll see the URL here where you can go and get this. You can also get it on Autodesk site. And I'm going to give you a summary of the policy research that we did, and then we'll look at some of the selected survey research, and I'll give you a quick look at what the special features are. So we'll start out with the policy research, because that gives you the broad picture of where the industry is going from government-driven sector. So the general trends that we looked at were, what are the factors that tend to be driving adoption of BIM policies by governments? How are they measuring success if they are? How are they dealing with data standards? And then what are they seeing in terms of the future around BIM and GIS and infrastructure data all coming together? So in terms of the factors driving adoption, it's interesting, the early owner adopters who started maybe in the early mid-2000s mostly focused on cost control, because if any of you who are in the business back then remember, we had crazy energy, labor, and material prices. So they were really looking to do three things. Can we do better construction documents so that we have more certainty? Can we do the spatial coordination so we can reduce the rework? And, you know, what can we do to use modeling to drive better efficiency in project delivery? And this is where you saw so much growth of prefab, especially structural and mechanical. But as the global financial downturn tended to stabilize a lot of that, it's not that costs aren't still important, but the focus expanded a lot. And so now what we have is owners looking at improving the design for overall building performance and really looking at the life cycle. So it's been a very interesting change here in public owner headset over the last few years. This is a great quote that comes from the report from Charles Matta at the GSA, because he's saying the BIM is essential to realize the recent aggressive energy reduction mandates here and elsewhere around the world. Only through BIM and smart building technologies can public owners do this kind of stuff. The other factor that was really interesting, not so much here, but in some of these centrally government mandated BIM programs, definitely interested in leveraging BIM to make their country's construction industry more competitive, both at home and in the global construction market. You'll see this very explicitly in the UK and in Singapore, and we'll look at those two programs a little bit later. You know, Singapore, small country, typically imports all their design and construction capabilities. And so what they're using this BIM roadmap for is to help their own local companies compete both locally and supporting higher quality of local employment, plus being able to work offshore. And in the UK, what they call BIM fluency is viewed as an absolute must-have skill set for the future health of their whole industry. One of the guys on the BIM task force just said it great. He says that, you know, the UK strategy is to drive a more competitive construction sector that can export design and engineering all over the world. So how are they going about measuring success? It's interesting because really only Singapore requires BIM metrics, and if they fund you, they're going to require that in exchange you give them metrics. And so they have a lot of metrics, which is kind of interesting. But other countries, they're more about kind of setting up these peer-to-peer relationships and sort of ground-up groups that share best practices. And frankly, many public owners don't measure it. Some of them say, hey, look, we're already convinced that it's good. We don't need to measure it anymore. And other ones talk about the fact that it's actually difficult to measure the impact of cost avoidance. This one owner asked to remain anonymous, but they said, you know, each project's so different that the assumptions that you need to calculate savings are actually kind of questionable, so they don't think it's worth the effort. And in terms of data standards, we're seeing around the world a lot of owners getting behind IFC, and we're seeing COBE for facilities management BIM beginning to gain some traction, but there are some challenges with that. A lot of people give us pushback around that big cumbersome spreadsheet format. But in general, what we heard from people was that it's better to have something that's evolving than nothing at all. And you're seeing some countries have stepped out, like Sweden, and in the UK, they've developed their own FM delivery standards. But I think ultimately you're going to see a lot of this stuff get folded into some major international ones. And then lastly, you know, what are they seeing around all of their assets, you know, BIM and GIS and infrastructure? Are they seeing all that pulled together? And they clearly are. There's a lot of activity around trying to merge this BIM data with infrastructure to get smart grids, smart cities, smart infrastructure, but it's challenging. Now they're stepping up into managing big data in order to do that, and there's cybersecurity issues and exchange standards and things. But there are some interesting efforts underway. Our own Army Corps of Engineers is working to do this, what they call CIM, Civil Information Modeling. And there is a specific initiative in the UK called Digital Built Britain, which is going to be working at level 3 BIM, which I'll talk about in a minute to differentiate it from level 2. but they're looking to use that to blend their building infrastructure and geospatial information. So you do have owners looking at how to use this data in more effective ways downstream. So I've mentioned a couple of these countries. Let's take a look at what we have in the report that's more of a deep dive in a handful of these countries, and then we have a summary matrix about a bunch of other ones. The first guys to really start this at the central government level or in Scandinavia. In 2005, Norway had a BIM mandate on public work, and in 2007, that was followed by Finland and Denmark. And as I said before, a lot of the initial focus was on costs, but in those cases, there were some other things at work. In general, those countries tend to centrally invest in innovative technologies way more than we do. And so this is just one of those things. And clearly, given their climate, they were very interested in better performing buildings and lower energy costs. And they were definitely interested in the competitive aspect of it. You look at a company like Skanska. If any of you guys are with Skanska or have worked with Skanska, you know they're very committed to BIM, and a lot of that came out of beginning in this 2005 central government mandate for BIM there. Finland and Norway, they're very prescriptive, centered around IFC data. Denmark is somewhat looser. They basically are saying, here's what we want to achieve, and they're leaving it to the market to figure out how to best deliver it, which is similar to what the UK is going to do, which you'll see in a second. But you know, in general, these countries are putting a lot of stuff in place to support this. They got training resources, they got guidelines they're publishing. They're also trying to drive it now into the education at the university level. Then you get Singapore, small population, top-down government, very prosperous country. They have a tradition of embracing technology. So when the BCA, the Building Construction Authority, put together their productivity roadmap in 2010, they set out with a very specific goal to raise their construction productivity over a 10-year period. And they also are looking to increase their own skilled labor and adopt technology in order to lower their reliance on low-skilled labor. Typically, they would bring in labor from less prosperous countries and just throw people at problems to get things done. They definitely want to end that, and they definitely want to replace that with a smaller group of higher-skilled laborers and a high degree of technology. So this is all about realizing this vision of a highly integrated, technologically advanced construction sector. So they focus on two things: constructability, which is, you know, how can we use more labor-efficient methods, and BIM. They have a goal of having 80% of the industry using BIM by the end of next year. And they focused initially on streamlining the regulatory process. They put something called CoreNet Plan Check in place in 2001. So they are definitely committed to BIM, coordination for value in the construction chain, and reducing the amount of rework. And here's their requirements for that e-submission I talked about. In 2013, they said anything over 20,000 square meters had to go through that architecturally. Then this year, they moved it to all the engineering, had to go through it. Next year, they're bringing the size down. Anything more than 5,000 square meters, which is about 50,000 square feet, has to go through this e-submittals. And so they're driving models through this submission process. And they have invested significantly in resources. They've got a heck of a BIM guide. It's on its 70-page document on version 2 now, you know, where they go through the explanation of the level of detail, where they then take it out through phase and to what it is that you're supposed to produce. And they have the responsibility matrix between the players and who's going to do what when. Compensation, interestingly, you know, they're taking the position that this for design fees shouldn't cost more, but it should be front-end loaded because of the decision-making process up front, and they're putting numbers to that. And they're also spelling out collaborative procedures with whole roadmaps. So they're really putting the work in place such that the entire construction economy knows what to do. And they're differentiating between a design-build and a design-build bid-build project. Also, they're putting some money in, I mean, serious money. They have a $250 million construction productivity and capability fund. They're giving grants directly to firms to encourage innovation. And they want this fund to help people really go beyond just the basic requirements that they're putting out there. Like, for instance, they gave $100,000 to this firm to shift from doing external safety scaffolds to this new movable working platform idea. They gave $1 million to this company to do an automated precast facility. I mean, they are absolutely directly funding innovation in their industry to make their industry stronger and more competitive. And they have a BIM fund. They have a $20 million BIM fund. And they're giving money directly to firms. Hundreds of firms have used this to do training, consultancy, buy software, upgrade hardware. And this is the place where you're required to document your metrics in order to get that money. And they did a survey last year, and they're really getting very good results from this. And they have a whole bunch of other stuff that's all centrally funded. I mean, it's amazing what they're doing and what you can do when you commit to this at the central government level. And they have a CEO council they're putting together to really try and drive this at the highest levels. And from the other end, they're taking away the old reliance on cheap labor, because they're now they're putting in limits on the numbers of low-skilled laborers you can bring in, and they're putting a high tax on them, essentially. So they're working both ends. They're making it really easy to get into technology, and they're making it very difficult now to rely on the old ways. So it's a very interesting experiment that they're doing there. And then the third one that we have done a deep dive on for you here is the UK. This is really absolutely the most ambitious one out there. And it's all part of something that came out in 2011, the government's construction strategy. And their goal is to cut life cycle cost and carbon consumption by 20% and to turn their industry into the leading construction industry on the planet. And already they're getting savings of 20% or more through this strategy. And a lot of this can be traced back to BIM. So they're focused on what they call level 2 BIM, which is also colloquially known as collaborative BIM. Essentially, it's a federated concept. It's just making sure that each of the major disciplines does generate their work in models. And at level 2, you may do 4D and you may do 5D, but it's not required. But they're making level 2 required on all centrally funded projects, and that's almost half of the construction activity in the UK is centrally funded. So they're having a big impact. And as a result, all the private companies are able to work now with firms that have worked on public jobs, and they're all adopting these things. When they get to level 3, which will be a couple of years from now, that means that 4D, 5D, and 6D life cycle stuff is all going to be absolutely required. They're moving extremely strongly in a top-down way. They're putting a huge number of resources available for people to use. They've got this UK BIM task force. They pull together people from the private sector, from academia, from government, and they're developing all these processes and guidelines and resources. I mean, it's incredible what they're doing. They're forming these community groups at the local level, you know, BIM for regs, BIM for facilities, and they're pushing the information out, and they're sharing best practices with people, because this mandate is coming, and it's very, very real. I mean, here's the cabinet, the minister for the cabinet office. That guy has the purse strings for the entire federal government funding there, and he's saying that he sees that BIM's going to position the UK to become the world leader in this. These people are really, really serious about this at the most senior levels of government. It's amazing what they're doing. And you go to that BIM Task Force website, and you see the incredible resources that they've already put together for people to use, all the partnerships that they have with organizations to push this stuff out, including our own here with NIBS and what we're doing here. And they already had this thing called government soft landings, which was all about taking data from, taking information from construction and moving it into facilities management. And so now they've got government soft landings BIM, which is all about, you know, they believe the BIM value proposition is all about that operational life cycle. And so they call it the golden thread. That's so British, of the building purpose through to delivery and operation. And they are mandating the use of government soft landings on all projects, new and the big refurbishments, in 2016. So they're actually really mandating this stuff to happen, and they're putting the resources there. Now you got the United States. You know, we don't have a central government BIM policy. We have a few innovative federal agencies and some state governments like Wisconsin that have some policies that require BIM. the GSA was really the first one. They started this back in 2003, and they really used it as kind of like a laser focused to make sure that they were getting space program validation. But they did get all the technology companies to support that workflow. And their idea was, look, if we force people during schematics to use BIM, they'll stay with it. And according to what they've shared with me, 30, 40, 50% of people were doing that at that time. And I credit them enormously with that, because they solved a very real problem they had, and they began to get proliferation of BIM use. And I think that was a great program, even though it was somewhat limited at the time. Since then, they've collaborated with NIBS, and they're definitely championing the IFC data standard, and they do what they can in terms of outreach and collaboration efforts to spur it. They've got this guide series, they got a toolkit, they do have champions all around the U.S., and they're willing to share best practices, but they're kind of doing it on a shoestring. They have a website, and there is some material there, but it's not nearly like you see going on in the UK. And the other sort of major player that's been at this for a while here is the Corps of Engineers. They did this largely to try and standardize the repeat types of projects that they have on their facilities, but they also, for the Department of Defense, but they also build for everybody. I mean, they build for states, they build for all kinds of other agencies. And so they formed this Army Corps and Industry BIM Consortium, and it's volunteers. There's no real funding for this thing. It's a lot of volunteers doing this, but they're trying to help push things from being graphic-centric BIM to info-centric BIM in an application-neutral context. And they have done some stuff. They've done some good things. They have a BIM execution plan. They have some templates. They have the minimum modeling requirements. They have some contract language. And they're the ones really trying to drive this GIS and infrastructure together. But again, they're doing it with internal funding. There's no real top-down dollars coming from the federal government to do this. And they have a website. And then in the report, you'll see we've summarized where a lot of other organizations stand. Here are the countries with national mandates and the basic information about them. And there's also ones with BIM policies that are by agency, and these are where ours fall. And you'll see NAVFAC just came out with theirs. And here's some information about that. And then in the Emirates, Dubai has done it. And then there's a lot of countries that don't really have national mandates, but they're doing something. And this kind of captures, so it's sort of in one place we try to pull together what everybody's doing around the world around BIM at that government level. So now that you get an understanding of what's happening in those countries around driving BIM from the top down, if you will, it'll help you understand what you'll see here in the survey research. So just some notes. So when you hear me say owners, and I'm not talking about all the owners on the planet Earth. I'm just talking about this 141 owners that we surveyed for this research. But all of these are definitely involved with BIM. And when I talk about BIM involvement, that's the phrase that we use as opposed to BIM adoption. We used involvement because a lot of times these owners are not actually using authoring software. Most of them aren't. In some cases, they're using model review software, and you'll see some numbers on that. But so we use the phrase BIM involvement, and that means, as we used in the screening, you're involved at least one project right now, and you are familiar with it and familiar with the benefits it's creating for you. And so, but that level of BIM involvement is in 4 different categories. Low means less than a quarter of your work is involved with BIM. All the way up to very high means over 3/4 of your work is involved with BIM. And so we have those 4 categories of owners in terms of their level of involvement. You'll see how that plays through some of these results. And then if you see me say large budget owners, we divided between those with big spend and those with relatively smaller spend. That cutoff here in the States was $400 million annual construction budget. And so when you see me refer to large budget owners in the States, those are people spending more than $400 million. 400 down to 10 would be the small ones. And in the UK, they don't spend as much. The projects aren't as big. The owners aren't spending quite as much. So that's really about £5 million means a large owner over there. So one of the first things we try to establish is, how much BIM are you doing? And so when you look in the U.S., there's been a relatively steady growth pattern, starting with where these owners said they were 2 years ago. The brown is people who are in the 25 to 50, the tan is 50 to 75, and then that dark green is the people doing that really heavy down at the deep end of the pool, doing more than 75%. And at the time, almost 60% were either light or they weren't doing it at all. Now that's grown nicely to where we are right now, where you're seeing almost a quarter of those owners saying that they're at that more than 75%. And we're only down to 41%, and we're still at that light level. And then where people believe they're going to be, this group believes they're going to be, this 101 U.S. owners believes they're going to be 2 years from now, 40% of them believe that they're going to be at that more than 75. So this is encouraging. I mean, owners are getting that there's a value here and that they want to do more. But when you compare it to the UK, it's pretty amazing. The UK, you know, this mandate's been known about for a while, and so even 2 years ago, you're seeing almost 92% of these owners were involved, at least at that 25 to 50% level, and it stayed pretty strong all the way through that period. Now we asked them, to what degree did any kind of government policy impact your involvement and your interest in it? In the United States, very little impact from any of the things that the GSA and the Army Corps or anybody else was doing. You can see 64% of them said it either had low, no, or they just didn't even know about it. And you compare that with the impact of what happened in the UK, 95% of those owners say, indeed, that was either moderate, high, or very high impact on why I got involved with BIM. And when we looked at that group, just those guys who in both places said moderate, high, or very high, we said, what did it actually make you do? And you can see the difference here with the UK. How many of them added BIM resources to their organization? How many of them were inspired to initiate a specific BIM project or accelerated their existing use of BIM on projects? So this central government policy in the UK has had an outstanding impact on driving BIM in a relatively short time into that economy. So then we said, all right, going forward, how many of you are actually going to require BIM? How many of you are not going to require it, but you'll encourage it? And then how many of you have no policy whatsoever? And as you can see, of that group of requiring BIM, you're only 25% here in the U.S. of the owners are requiring it. It's shifted more towards public. 30% of the public owners are in that group, and only 11% of the privates. You're seeing here where those who are at the deep end of the pool, the very high involvement, that's where you're seeing a whole lot more of this commitment to it. Half of those group are requiring BIM. Those who are still in the shallow end of the pool, only 10% of those are requiring it. And then you'll also see the impact of the bigger companies, the larger budget ones. Over half of those are requiring BIM versus only 10% of those who are at the small budget end. And in the UK, 68% are saying that they're going to require BIM. 75% of those are public. And then in terms of no policy, there's only 7% of those in the UK, but still a third of our owners don't even have any BIM policy whatsoever. So when we talk to those owners who either require or encourage BIM, and we ask them, do you have guidelines? Because that's so important to actually have guidelines to help people know what it is that's expected. In the U.S., about half said they felt like they had good guidelines, but a quarter of them said they have no guidelines at all. And you'll see the impact of all the work that the government's done to put things together for people to use. 76% say they've got good guidelines because they can basically download them from the task force, and nobody said that they don't have any guidelines at all. So again, this is just an incredible confirmation of the power of that central government mandate. So we asked them about how much they are actually using software. There wasn't that much use of authoring software, so this is really about review software, the Navisworks types of capability. In the U.S., you got about 60% saying that they own it, but really only 15% use it frequently. Over in the U.K., you've got more owning it and way more using it frequently. So owners are far more engaged in actually reviewing models than you're seeing among owners here. Also, in terms of are you using consultants, there are a whole set of requirements that you have to comply with in the UK. on those government mandates, and so the use of consultants has really grown, as you're about to see. Here in the U.S., there's some use. You got 38% saying that they either frequently or always use consultants now, and that'll grow to about half of those owners. Then you see what happens in the U.K. Everybody's either frequently or always using BIM consultants, and a third are always using them now, and over half are always going to be using them. So there's a big business in BIM consulting over there to these owners. So we asked them, when we got into the value side of things, let's just give us an overall sense of the impact. Has it been positive? Has it been negative? And they could go, from 1 to 5 positive, and they could go from 1 to -5 negative, or else they could just be neutral. And you can see, there's a lot of good positive on both here and the UK, which is very encouraging to see. And within that positive group, most people were giving it a 4 or a 5 out of the 5 they had a choice for. But, in the US, we still have a whole lot of people on the fence here, almost 30% kind of just in that neutral space. Interestingly, you've got that chunk over there in brown in the UK too, which I thought was kind of an interesting result. And I think that although most of those are public owners, and I think maybe there's a little bit of pushback about in some of these public agencies about having BIM forced on them. Maybe some of these people feel like they're not ready for it. So it was kind of interesting to see that 12% number of these. So then we get into the benefits, and we laid out 5 different BIM benefits, and we said, to what degree do you agree with this statement for your own experience with BIM? And the way we've laid this out here, which I think is kind of interesting, is you'll see the purple line and the lighter purple line are the very high involvement, the U.S. owners way down at the deep end of the pool, and then the U.S. owners way up at the shallow end of the pool with only a low BIM involvement, less than a quarter of their work in BIM. And that shows to be interesting as we move through these things. Visualization, that's what you get that on your first project, all right? You get that better visualization, you're engaged in it. So even the low involvement people are saying that they really agree that that's a great benefit, that they're getting that benefit. As you begin to move through them, though, you'll see that it starts to shift a bit. We asked, do you believe that you're actually getting more well-reasoned design because your design team is using analysis and simulation capabilities? With those very high involvement guys here, it scored pretty well. Starts to not score as well with those low involvement people, because I believe it really requires a more sophisticated design team, plus it requires an owner understanding that that's what they should be asking for. And those less experienced owners aren't getting it to the same degree. It's scoring extremely well in the UK. And you're moving down to a bigger spread where, moving into the construction phase, do you feel like you're seeing fewer problems during construction, fewer errors, fewer coordination issues and construction errors? And again, you're getting the more highly involved guys mostly saying yes, but now you have less than half of the shallow end of the pool owners feeling like they're experiencing that. And in some cases, it may be that they don't know they're getting that. They're not engaged enough to understand it, or they're not doing enough projects to feel it. But in the UK, very highly rated. And again, very highly rated in the UK in terms of beneficial impact on project schedule. The very high involvement owners here are saying it, but even fewer of the low involvement owners feel like they are getting a schedule impact. And then last was cost, which showed the biggest spread here, almost 100% spread between the low involvement users and the very high involvement users here, feeling like they're getting a cost benefit. So I think part of the takeaway of this is, to those owners in the shallow end of the pool, it is definitely worth going down to the deep end, doing more and more of your work in BIM, because when you look at the people down there at the deep end, they're getting these benefits that would be very good for you to get. In the UK, you're not seeing it as strongly as some of the other ones, I believe, because they're relatively new into this, and you really definitely have to have finished a bunch of projects before that you're going to get cost impact. But I think we're going to see those numbers increase over time. Then we said, to what degree you're actually measuring the impact. And as you can see, 88% in the UK are actively involved in measuring the impact of BIM. Only 16% are here. And there's various reasons for that, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but you can see over here on the right some of the things which people are using by which to measure. So we asked those who aren't formally measuring, which is most of them in the U.S. and a small handful in the U.K., and we said why. And you'll see some of the answers. They basically knew. You know, most of those in the U.S. Said that they understood it's going to be good. They didn't feel the need to. Some of them also said, look, frankly, I don't know how to do it, or it's too hard to do it. And then in the UK, most of that group, about half of that group, actually said they used to do it, but they got to the point where they just don't feel it's necessary anymore because they get it. They know BIM is good. Then you get into FM, which is that 6D, which is going to be mandated in the UK, and we'd all have to admit, is very much in its infancy here in the US. So we asked those owners, look, do you see that there's going to be value for you in moving modeling data into that FM phase? 39% of the owners here in the States see absolutely no value for it at all, and only 18% perceive a high value for it right now. And then we said, how about 5 years from now? What do you think will be going on then? Well, at least we get half of our owners saying that they believe within 5 years you'll actually be able to get some value out of it. So that's the time frame that your owners are thinking is legitimate in terms of getting the value out of BIM for FM. The UK, since it's been baked in from the get-go, hugely different. 3/4 already saying that they know that there's a high value to doing this. Nobody's saying they don't see any value. And then basically 5 years out, essentially everybody is knowing that they're going to get high value out of this because they've baked this into the program from the get-go with the government soft landings mandate, with the COBE UK, with all the awareness efforts that they're doing. You know, it's amazing to see what this central government mandate has done for that aspect, which is going so slowly here in the States. So we asked, look, if you got a model, would you even be able to do something with it? Do you have capability right now to actually leverage BIM into your FM systems? You know, and here in the States, 2/3 say they really don't have, you know, they got no or low capability for it. But half do forecast that they're going to have that capability. You know, the same sort of percentage that you saw, people believing that there's going to be high value. But then you look at the UK, for instance, and you know, half of them already have it now, and basically 92% say they're going to have it in 5 years, and nobody's saying that they won't have any capability at all. So having it baked into the program like it is, and having it be mandated like it's going to be by 2016 is really driving it very effectively. It's going to be amazing to watch what happens in the UK over the next 3 or 4 years with how much they're going to embrace BIM at the owner level. So when you look just at the U.S., there's definitely differences in our own population in terms of this issue of capability. You look at the large owners out there 5 years from now, most of them believe they're going to have it. They still have a minority of the small owners. The folks at that very high level, most of them believe they're going to have that capability versus a much smaller group of the low involvement. And the public sector, much more so than the private sector here in the U.S. So when you look at just how many of them are actually getting models today and how many of those models actually use COBE and leverage COBE, since they've made that model transfer important in the UK, and since COBE is an important element of that, you know, you're just seeing the top line is the US in both those cases. You see how few are actually getting models and how few of them have COBE versus, you know, the two green bars in the UK in terms of how many are getting models and how many involve COBE. I mean, it's you know, just amazing, these numbers. So then we asked them in a set of closing questions, you know, talk about your environment. To what degree do you believe you're actually having support for BIM? Does your top management provide adequate support? Does your organization's project delivery methods actually support the use of BIM? Do you have standards? Is there enough skill in your communities? Does your staff understand benefits? Does your organization use contracts to support this? And do you have established ways to measure? And you know, indeed, the high involvement folks are feeling more strongly than the low involvement here, but the UK numbers are just blowing them away. We asked the one sort of negative question, which is, does your organization perceive that BIM has an extra cost? And as you can see, that's where the UK came in lowest. They've kind of gotten over that. And we said, what do you need to expand your BIM use in the U.S. And in the UK? And you can see the differences here. Standards and model development exchange. They're very focused on that. They're very focused on getting more skills at design firms there. They're very focused on all the other owners in an area working and building the skills of that ecosystem and the ability to measure, because they measure so much over there. So here you see the difference between the UK and the US in terms of what's your biggest challenge. The US, we're looking for more people to do it. Over there, since they're still in their earlier days, there's a lot of people still struggling with the cost. But, followed right after that's going to be the human resources aspect of it. So when you get the report, again, it's free to download at the analyticsstore.construction.com. I encourage you to go there, and this one and a whole bunch of other great ones are there. There's a bunch of special features that we developed for this. There's a pretty deep dive into the state of BIM for facilities management, and we got a bunch of folks here to give us their views on what's going on. Brigitte Foster said it very well. She said the basic problem she sees is that where owners are very data-centric, the AEC community is much more model-centric, and we've got to find a way to bring that together. We also did a look at how people are using BIM for sustainability. Craig Dubler's got a couple projects that he's been trying to drive that through Penn State, saying those facade and MEP models definitely identifying problems, and what he's trying to focus on is making sure that whatever efficiencies they set up during design construction don't stop once the turnover is there. So he's really trying to tie that into that life cycle thinking. We have a couple of amazing case studies of this 7.6 million square foot, $3.5 billion project, an airport terminal, a 17-story tall entrance hall there. They brought BIM in relatively late to the process, and it had phenomenal impact when they implemented it. And then there's an interesting one in the UK where the Ministry of Justice was the first government ministry when the mandate was announced. They were the first ones to stick their hand up and say, let us be your guinea pig. They had really jumped into lean construction, and they thought this supported their lean initiative, and they've done amazing things. This is an example from that where they actually built a mock-up, physical mock-up of this whole plumbing spool here that did sinks and toilets that would save them 15 minutes in servicing it in the cells. They built a physical mock-up, they laser scanned it, and they put it right into BIM for fabrication. And the kinds of very practical things that they're doing over there that they're baking into their process. We asked a series of AEC firms what their perspective is on what makes a good BIM owner, and you've got some very interesting stuff there. And again, this is intended to be, frankly, educational for owners themselves to hear from their teams about what they can do to actually let the teams do a better job on their behalf with BIM. And then we put in our own editorial recommendations based on what we saw in the findings and what we believe is out there, again, to try and help owners understand how they could be more effective and move more quickly through this. So just to summarize some of the key points here, we're seeing this involvement definitely steadily expanding. 40% of the U.S. BIM owners think they're going to be at a very high BIM involvement versus just 11 right now. And the UK central government mandate has been amazing. You've got 98% of them are currently at least at the moderate level, and 28% are currently at that very high level, and it's going to grow phenomenally over the next few years. This government mandate there versus no mandate here is just amazing in terms of who's mandating BIM and what they're doing to support it. And 2/3 of them are going to require it. Versus here, where we saw some of these numbers, and it just proves the effectiveness of that central government mandate. And then there's a comparison of the UK owners and US owners in terms of those benefit statements. And you can just see there's just generally more BIM enthusiasm over there. A whole lot more of them saying that they're getting this at a higher, very high level. You know, now whether some of this is just UK BIM boosterism, I don't know, but you know, the numbers are pretty striking in terms of the difference of owners who are really feeling like they're getting these benefits and are aware of it. And then, you know, BIM for FM is definitely still emerging. The UK is way more focused on it than we are, and I think you're going to see they're probably going to write the book for it over there. And hopefully, you know, we'll be able to take advantage of the work that they do and begin to put it in place here. But I think you're going to see leadership coming from the UK.